They said an Omega rejecting an Alpha King was impossible. They were wrong, and the look on his face when I said it out loud, in front of everyone, was worth every single scar he gave me. The great hall of the Ashford Pack's main estate had never been this quiet. Not during a funeral, not during the last war declaration, not even the night the East Wing caught fire and half the pack stood outside in their pajamas watching it burn. No, nothing had ever silenced 300 people the way 2 words just did. My 2 words. I reject you. I said it clearly. No trembling. No hesitation. My voice didn't crack, which honestly surprised me because my knees were shaking so bad underneath my dress slacks that I could feel my left thigh vibrating against the right one. But my voice, steady, clear, almost bored, like I was reading a grocery list out loud. Milk, eggs, rejection. Moving on. My name is Caleb Mercer. I'm 22 years old. I'm 5'9", 163 pounds of lean muscle that nobody in this room has ever taken seriously. And until approximately 45 seconds ago, I was the Omega standing in the center of this hall being publicly rejected by the Alpha King of the entire Eastridge territory. Keyword, was. Because somewhere between him opening his mouth to finish the rejection ceremony and me deciding I had exactly 0 reasons left to stay quiet, the script flipped. Let me back up, just a little. His name is Dominic Ashford, Alpha King, 27. 6'3" of carved from granite unfairness, dark brown hair, jaw sharp enough to cut glass. Eyes the color of a storm you know is going to ruin your entire weekend. The kind of man who walks into a room and the air pressure changes. Packs used to go to war over territory. Now they just send Dominic to a meeting and everyone folds within 20 minutes. I've known him for 3 years. We were fated mates. I felt the bond the second I turned 19, standing in the university library in New Haven, Connecticut, holding a copy of constitutional law textbooks, when a scent hit me so hard I nearly knocked over an entire shelf. Cedar. Rain. Something warm underneath it that made my chest ache in a way I had no words for. 2 weeks later I found out whose scent it was. I spent the next 3 years watching Dominic Ashford look through me like I was furniture. Not at me, through me, like I was a window. Like the interesting thing was always whatever existed behind me, beyond me, further away from me. I was background noise to him, white static. A footnote in the margins of his very important, very powerful, very full life. I tried. I want the record to show that I tried. I showed up to every pack event I was allowed into. I stayed quiet when his inner circle made comments about my rank. I smiled through 4 separate incidents of someone spilling a drink on me at a formal gathering, twice by the same person, which I am now 90% certain was not an accident. I read every piece of pack law I could find, thinking maybe if I understood his world better, I could find a place in it. And I will take this to my grave, I even baked for this man once, peach cobbler from scratch. Dropped it off at the estate front desk with a note. It came back 3 days later, unopened, with a sticky note in his assistant's handwriting that said, "The Alpha King does not accept unsolicited food items from pack members outside his inner circle." The peach cobbler went in the trash. Something in my chest went with it. So here's where we are now. Tonight was supposed to be the formal rejection ceremony. Pack law requires that if a fated bond goes unaccepted for 3 years, the Alpha must officially dissolve it in front of witnesses. Apparently, just ignoring your Omega for 36 months doesn't legally count. Who knew? There are paperwork requirements. There's a whole speech. Dominic had clearly memorized his. He stood at the center dais, dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my entire apartment's worth of furniture, and he read the dissolution statement in that low, even voice of his like he was approving a quarterly budget report. Calm. Professional. Not a single flicker of anything in those storm gray eyes. In accordance with Eastridge Pack Law, Article 7, I, Dominic Ashford, formally dissolve the recognized fated bond between myself and Omega Caleb Mercer, effective this date, witnessed by this assembly. He looked up. For exactly 1 second, his eyes found mine, and I saw it, the thing he'd been hiding for 3 years behind all that cold, polished nothing. It was only there for a second, a flicker, like a light bulb deciding whether it wants to keep working. But I saw it. Guilt, not regret, not longing. Guilt. The specific kind that means you know exactly what you're doing and you're choosing to do it anyway. Something in me went very, very still. Then it went hot. Does the Omega accept this dissolution? the officiator asked, turning to me with the kind of bored formality that made it clear he expected me to say yes, sign the form, and exit stage left so everyone could get to the reception dinner. I looked at Dominic. He was already looking away. I pulled my copy of Eastridge Pack Law, Article 7, from my inner jacket pocket. I'd had it printed and highlighted for 2 weeks. Actually, I said, unfolding it slowly, I don't. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I have ever heard. I invoke the reciprocal clause. I kept my voice level, calm, almost like I was approving a quarterly budget report. Under Article 7, Subsection 4, an Omega who has fulfilled all bond obligations during the waiting period retains the right to issue a counter-rejection, effective immediately, with full legal standing. I folded the paper back up, slid it into my pocket, looked directly at Dominic Ashford for the first time in 3 years, with something other than hope in my eyes. I reject you, Alpha King. The great hall went silent enough that I could hear my own heartbeat. Dominic Ashford, for the first time since I had known him, looked completely, utterly undone, and I have to be honest with you. I had imagined this moment approximately 400 times over the past 3 years. Different versions, different settings, different lighting. Sometimes I was calmer. Sometimes I was crying. Once, in a version I will never speak of again, there was dramatic rainfall involved, and I had a much better outfit on. None of those versions prepared me for what his face actually did. It wasn't anger. Not yet. It was something closer to a man who just reached for a door he had opened 1,000 times before, and this time, for the first time, it didn't move. Just solid wall where the handle used to be. Pure, unfiltered disorientation. His jaw tightened once, controlled. Like a reflex he caught halfway. Then the storm gray eyes dropped to my jacket pocket where I had just returned the folded paper, and something shifted behind them. Something cold and calculating that made the small hairs on the back of my neck stand up in a way that had nothing to do with attraction and everything to do with self-preservation. He's already thinking 3 moves ahead, I noted internally. Fantastic. The officiator recovered first. Bless him. He cleared his throat with the kind of sound a man makes when he has been doing ceremonial pack law for 20 years and has never once had to improvise, a short, dry sound like a textbook falling off a shelf. The reciprocal clause, he repeated slowly, as if testing whether the words would change, meaning if he said them at half speed. Subsection 4, I confirmed helpfully. I can read it aloud if that would be useful. Someone in the crowd made a sound that was definitely a laugh converted at the last second into a cough. I did not look to find out who. I was focused on the officiator, who is now consulting his own documents with the energy of a man deeply regretting his career choices. 300 people stood behind me and said absolutely nothing. I could feel them, though. That specific quality of silence that has weight to it, that presses against the back of your neck and the sides of your face. 300 people collectively holding their breath. I knew, without looking, that every single phone in that room was either already recording or about to be. Welcome to the worst and best moment of my life. Streaming live. The clause is valid, the officiator said finally, with the defeated tone of a man confirming his own dentist appointment. The counter-rejection stands. Under Article 7, Subsection 4, Omega Caleb Mercer has exercised his legal right of reciprocal dissolution. He looked up at Dominic. Dominic had not moved. That was the thing that got me. Everyone else in the room had shifted at least slightly, shuffled feet, turned heads, leaned toward their neighbor with wide eyes. Normal human responses to witnessing something that had probably never happened in Eastridge territory before. Dominic stood completely still. His hands were at his sides. His shoulders were level. His face had returned to that careful, carved blankness he wore like armor. But his eyes tracked to me again, and there was something in them now that was different from the guilt I had. Seen a few minutes ago, it took me a second to name it. Focus. Total, absolute, unbroken focus. The kind that doesn't feel like attention so much as it feels like being selected, like something that was previously background has just been reclassified. My heart did something embarrassing and unhelpful. I told it to stop. It ignored me completely. This ceremony is concluded, the officiator announced, rolling up his documents with slightly more force than necessary. Both parties are reminded that the reciprocal dissolution carries full legal weight under pack law and cannot be. What are the compensation terms? My voice came out steady. I was genuinely proud of myself. The officiator stopped rolling his documents. A ripple went through the crowd. An actual ripple, like I had dropped something heavy into still water and the surface was still moving. "I'm sorry," the officiator said. "Article 7, subsection 4, paragraph 2, I said. Reciprocal dissolution triggered by an omega who filled bond obligations during the waiting period activates mandatory compensation review. Territory rights, status reassignment, financial settlement." I tilted my head slightly. I would like to begin that process. The silence took on a new texture entirely. It wasn't just held breath anymore. It was the specific sound of 300 people recalibrating everything they thought they knew about the Omega who had been standing quietly in the background of Dominic Ashford's life for 3 years. I heard someone whisper, "He came prepared." Correct, I did. Dominic moved. Not toward me. Not away. He simply turned his head slightly toward the man standing at his right shoulder, a tall beta named Griffin Cole who served as his chief legal advisor and had the permanent expression of someone solving a math problem in his head. Dominic said nothing out loud. He didn't need to. Griffin was already reaching into his own briefcase. The message was clear enough. We're not panicking, we're pivoting. I watched this happen with the specific emotion of someone who has spent 3 years learning to read a person and is now using every single thing they learned against him. "The compensation review requires a formal hearing," Griffin said smoothly. Stepping forward, his voice carried the polished calm of someone paid very well to stay unrattled. "It cannot be conducted at a dissolution ceremony. A date will be." "I know," I said. "I'll be there." Griffin paused, looked at me, looked at Dominic. Something passed between them that I couldn't fully read, but I felt the edges of it. A question that had no answer yet. A variable that had just entered their very controlled equation without an invitation. That variable was me. I turned to leave. And that was when I felt it. A pull. Low and sudden, starting somewhere in the center of my chest and radiating outward like the first note of a song you know will wreck you. My psychometry had been quiet all evening, politely keeping itself in the background the way I had trained it to do in crowded rooms. It was a habit. Touch an object, read its history, try not to accidentally narrate someone's emotional backstory out loud at a formal event. Basic social skills. But the pull wasn't coming from an object. It was coming from the dais. From the wooden podium at the center, where the dissolution documents were still spread out, unsigned on my end, edges slightly curled. I kept walking, but the pull followed me all the way to the door. "There is something on that podium," my ability whispered, quiet and certain the way it always was when it had already decided something mattered. Something with a history you haven't read yet. Something that changes everything. I made it exactly 4 steps past the Great Hall's double doors before my feet stopped cooperating. Not because I wanted them to. My brain was sending very clear signals. Walk. Keep walking. You just publicly rejected an alpha king in front of 300 witnesses. You invoked a legal clause that probably hasn't been used in 40 years. And you asked for a compensation hearing with the calm energy of someone ordering coffee. You are allowed to now walk to your car, sit in the parking lot, and have a quiet breakdown in private like a normal person. My feet disagreed. The pull was stronger out here. That made no sense logistically, since I had moved further from the podium. But my ability did not particularly care about logistics. It had its own opinion, and it was currently broadcasting that opinion directly into my sternum, at a frequency I could not ignore. I stood in the corridor outside the Great Hall, hands in my pockets, staring at the dark hardwood floor, having a silent argument with my own superpower. This was, genuinely, a recurring theme in my life. Psychometry is not a glamorous ability. I want to be clear about that because people always have the wrong idea. They hear, you can read the history of objects by touching them, and they imagine something cinematic. Glowing hands, dramatic visions, emotional music swelling in the background. The reality is that I once touched a park bench in downtown New Haven and spent the next 10 minutes emotionally processing a breakup that happened in 2019 between 2 people I had never met. I cried a little. A pigeon watched me with zero sympathy. It is an ability that requires management. Gloves help. Keeping my hands in my pockets in crowded rooms helps. Developing an extremely specific internal filter that sorts incoming emotional data by relevance helps. What does not help is when the ability decides something is urgent and starts pulling at me like a dog that found a scent trail and has made its feelings about changing direction very known. I exhaled slowly, turned around, walked back toward the great hall doors. The crowd inside had broken into conversation the moment the ceremony concluded. The specific sound of 300 people all deciding to talk at exactly the same time. It was loud and layered, and it covered my re-entry so cleanly that nobody noticed me slip back in along the left wall. Nobody except one person. I felt his attention before I saw it. That focused quality I had clocked earlier, the kind that reclassifies rather than simply notices. My eyes moved to the dais out of pure trained instinct and found Dominic already watching me from across the room where he stood in a tight cluster, with Griffin and 2 other members of his inner circle. He had noticed me leave. He had noticed me come back. The expression on his face was unreadable in the way that very controlled people go unreadable when they are actively choosing not to react. But his eyes tracked me with that same locked, unbroken attention, and I made the executive decision to simply pretend I did not see him and focus on the podium. Priorities. The dissolution documents were still spread across the podium surface. The officiator had stepped away, probably to call someone and report the most chaotic ceremony of his career. A few pack members had drifted toward the dais out of curiosity, but nobody was touching the documents, which meant nobody was in my way. I crossed the room with purpose. The kind of walk that says I belong here and I have somewhere to be, which is the universal body language, for please do not ask me what I am doing. I reached the podium. Up close, the documents were standard pack law formatting. Ivory paper, formal letterhead, Dominic's signature already in place on his portion. Clean and precise like everything else about him. My unsigned line waited at the bottom with a quiet patience that felt almost smug, but that wasn't what was pulling at me. It was the envelope underneath, partially tucked beneath the document stack, cream-colored, unsealed. The corner of it was just visible beneath the edge of the papers. It looked administrative, unremarkable. The kind of envelope that comes with formal proceedings and contains things like scheduling notices or filing instructions. My ability said otherwise. I reached out and touched the corner of the envelope with 2 fingers. The vision hit me immediately. Not slow, not gentle. Immediate. The way the strongest emotional imprints always were. I was not in the Great Hall anymore. I was standing in a different room, smaller, wood-paneled, dim-lit, an office I didn't recognize. And I was seeing it the way psychometry always showed me things. Not through my own eyes, but through the residue of the last person who held this object with strong emotion, Dominic. He was sitting at a desk, and the envelope was in his hands, and he was staring at it with an expression I had never seen on his face in 3 years of watching him. Not the controlled blankness, not the cold authority. Something underneath all of that. Something with the specific shape of a man who has been carrying something heavy. For so long he has forgotten what it felt like before the weight. He opened the envelope. I could not see what was inside from this angle, from this imprint. Psychometry gave me emotion and context, not always full detail, but I felt what he felt in that moment with horrible invasive clarity, dread, heavy and specific, and underneath the dread, something that made my chest constrict in a way that had nothing to do with my own feelings. Grief, old grief. The kind that has been living in a person so long, it has become structural, load-bearing, part of the architecture of who they are. The vision released me. I pulled my fingers back from the envelope and stood very still for a moment, breathing carefully through my nose. The great hall was loud around me. Voices, movement, the clink of someone already raiding the reception dinner that had been set up in the adjoining room because apparently a historic public rejection did not cancel the catering. I stared at the envelope. I did not take it. I was not a thief and I was not reckless. But I stood there with my hand, hovering 1 inch above that cream-colored corner, and I understood with absolute certainty that whatever was inside it was the reason Dominic Ashford had been choosing distance for 3 years. Not indifference, not pride, something else entirely. You came back. The voice came from directly behind me, low and even, close enough that I felt the warmth of it against the back of my neck before I processed the words. I did not jump. I want that stated for the record. My shoulders moved approximately 1/2 inch upward, and then returned to their original position, which is a completely normal involuntary response to being approached silently from behind, not a jump. And I will not be taking questions. I turned around slowly. Dominic Ashford was standing close enough that I had to recalibrate the amount of personal space I had assumed I was operating with. And the expression on his face was not controlled at all. That was the part that got me. I had a whole system built around Dominic Ashford's controlled face. 3 years of data. I knew the slight tension at the corner of his jaw that meant he was annoyed but managing it. I knew the way his eyes went a half shade darker when someone said something that landed wrong. I knew the specific quality of his stillness when he was thinking, versus when he was simply waiting for someone to finish talking so he could leave. I did not have a system for this. This was something unscripted. Something that had slipped through whatever internal management process he ran, constantly the way water finds the one crack in an otherwise solid wall. His expression was not angry, not cold, not the carefully constructed neutral I had memorized. It was raw in a way that made me want to take one step backward. I stayed exactly where I was. "You came back," he said again. Not a question this time, just a fact he was processing out loud. "Forgot something," I said. We both looked at the envelope. We both looked back at each other. "Did you touch it?" he said. Still that low, even voice, but something underneath the evenness now, a current running below the surface. I considered lying. It was a genuinely appealing option for approximately 2 seconds. "Yes," I said. Something moved across his face. Not anger. Closer to the expression of a man who just watched the last exit on the highway disappear in his rearview mirror. "What did you see?" he said. "You. An office. The envelope in your hands." I kept my voice matter-of-fact, clinical. The tone I used when I reported psychometric readings professionally, which was a thing I did occasionally for PAC legal proceedings when the territory solicitor needed object history for a case. Business voice, neutral. "You were grieving something." Dominic was quiet for a moment that stretched long enough to become uncomfortable. Around us, the reception noise continued, oblivious. Someone laughed loudly near the adjoining room entrance. A cluster of PAC members 3 rows of chairs away were deep in conversation, phones out, definitely discussing what had just happened at the ceremony. None of them were looking at us. We were somehow completely alone inside a room full of people. "How long?" he said, finally. I blinked. "How long what? Have you had the ability?" "Since I was 16. I tilted my head slightly. "Is that the part of this conversation you want to be having right now? My origin story? Because I have to tell you, I had a whole list of topics I expected to come up tonight, and that was not on it." Something happened at the corner of his mouth. It was not a smile. It was the very distant relative of a smile. The kind of facial movement that happens when something lands, and the person receiving it is actively fighting their own reaction. I filed that away. "The envelope," he said. His voice had shifted slightly. The current under the surface was stronger now, more controlled in the way things get more controlled when the person is working harder to manage them.
"You didn't open it."
It wasn't mine to open. He looked at me for a moment with an expression I could not fully categorize. It had several layers. The top layer was still that assessing, recalibrating attention. Underneath that, something else. Something that had the specific texture of being surprised by a person you thought you had, already fully accounted for. "No," he said quietly. "It wasn't." He reached past me, not touching me. Careful not to touch me, actually, which I noticed with a precision that was slightly embarrassing. He reached past my left shoulder and picked up the envelope from the podium, and for 1 second his arm was close enough that I caught his scent cedar. Rain. That warm undercurrent that had been wrecking my internal chemistry since I was 19 years old. My ability stayed quiet. Whatever the scent bond was or had been, or legally was no longer, the psychometry didn't engage with living people the same way it engaged with objects. But my own completely non-supernatural human senses engaged with absolutely no hesitation. I looked straight ahead at the empty podium and said nothing. He straightened, envelope in hand. "You should leave," he said. Not unkind, not dismissive. The tone of someone saying something they believe is practical. "I was leaving," I pointed out. "You followed me back in." That almost not smile again. Gone before it fully arrived. "The compensation hearing," he said. "Griffin will contact your representative within the week." "I'm my own representative." A pause. "You don't have PAC counsel?" "I have a law degree and a highlighted copy of Article 7. I think I'm fine. This time the silence had a different quality. He was looking at me with that full locked attention again, and I had the specific sensation of being someone who has just revealed a card they didn't intend to play yet, which was fair. I hadn't intended to mention the law degree. Why did you do it, he said. The question was quiet, direct. No preamble, no diplomatic softening. Just the question, dropped into the space between us like something he had been holding and decided, suddenly, to set down. I did not pretend to misunderstand him. Because you were going to dissolve a bond in public, in front of 300 people, and walk away like I was a form you had finished filling out, I kept my voice level. Not angry, just honest in the way that costs something. And I decided that if it was going to be public, it was going to be equal. He was very still. That's it, he said. That's it. Something in his expression shifted again, deeper this time, past the assessment and the careful control and the unreadable layers. For just a moment, I saw something that matched what I had felt in the psychometric vision. Not the dread, the thing underneath it. The grief. It was there and then it was gone, recovered behind the stillness so fast I almost doubted I had seen it. Almost. The hearing will be fair, he said. I know, I said, because I'll be there. He looked at me one more second, then he turned and walked back toward Griffin and his inner circle. Envelope held at his side, posture exactly as composed as it had been when the night started. But his left hand, the one not holding the envelope, was closed into a fist at his side. I saw that too. I stood at the podium for another 3 seconds after he walked away, doing the thing I always did after a high-stakes interaction, which was a rapid, internal audit of everything that had just happened, and whether any of it was going to come back and bite me. Verdict. Possibly yes on multiple counts, but nothing I could not handle. I straightened my jacket, checked that my copy of Article 7 was still in my pocket because at this point, that document was basically my emotional support item, and turned toward the exit with the calm energy of someone who had not just detonated a social grenade in the middle of a formal pack ceremony. I made it 6 steps. Caleb Mercer. The voice came from my left, not loud, controlled in a different way than Dominic's control. Where Dominic's stillness felt like a deep lake, this felt like a lid on something pressurized. I turned. The man standing near the left wall was someone I recognized, but had never spoken to directly. Nathaniel Ashford, Dominic's younger brother by 4 years. Same dark hair, different build, leaner, less carved from granite, more sharp angles and restless energy. His eyes were a warmer shade of gray than Dominic's, closer to slate, and right now they were fixed on me with an expression that was doing a lot of work to appear casual and failing in specific ways that my psychometry did not even need to engage with. He was holding a glass of something he had not been drinking. His thumb was moving against the side of it in a small, repetitive motion. Nervous, or something adjacent to nervous. Nathaniel Ashford, I said, matching his tone exactly. Conversational, neutral, the verbal equivalent of I see you're calm, and I raise you unbothered. He pushed off the wall and crossed toward me in a few unhurried steps, stopping at a distance that was socially acceptable but felt closer than it was. A deliberate choice. The kind of spatial positioning that says I want your attention without making it a confrontation. That was quite a performance tonight, he said. I prefer the word exercise, as in I exercised my legal rights. I smiled pleasantly. But sure, performance works too. Something shifted in his expression, not amusement. Something more complicated with edges to it. You touched the envelope, he said. My pleasant smile stayed exactly where it was. Internally, I rearranged several things very quickly. People touch things at formal events, I said. It happens. Not that envelope. His voice stayed even, not without consequences. The word consequences landed in the air between us with a specific weight that was not quite a threat and not quite a warning. It occupied the uncomfortable territory between the two, which I suspected was intentional. I looked at him for a moment. Really looked. The way I did when I was assessing rather than simply observing. Nathaniel Ashford was nervous. He was also determined. And underneath both of those things, running quiet and steady like something he had been living with for a long time, was guilt. Not the fresh guilt I had seen flash across Dominic's face during the ceremony. Old guilt. Settled guilt. The kind that has found its corner and unpacked. What's in the envelope? I said. Not a question. More like thinking out loud in his direction. Nothing that concerns you anymore. His thumb stopped moving against the glass. You rejected him. The bond is dissolved. Whatever history exists in that envelope is pack business, not yours. Pack business, I repeated. Interesting choice of words for something that was sitting on the dissolution podium at my ceremony. His jaw tightened. One small, controlled movement. Walk away from this, Caleb. His voice dropped slightly. Not threatening, almost urgent. Take the compensation. Go through the hearing, get whatever the settlement is, and walk away. You don't want to pull on this thread. I tilted my head. Why not? Because, he said, and for just a second the careful control slipped, and something raw came through. Honest in a way I did not expect from him. Some things were buried for good reasons. We looked at each other. The reception noise moved around us, indifferent. A pack member walked past close enough that we both shifted slightly. A natural adjustment, and the moment compressed without breaking. I thought about the vision. The dim office. Dominic's hands on the envelope. The dread and the old grief and the specific heaviness of a man carrying something structural. I thought about Nathaniel's thumb against the glass. I thought about the word buried. You know what's in it, I said quietly. He did not answer, which was its own answer. You knew before tonight, I said. You've known for a while. Still nothing. But his eyes did not move away from mine, and that staying, that refusal to look away even while refusing to speak, told me more than words would have. Does Dominic know that you know? I said. Something crossed his face, fast and painful and gone. Leave it alone, he said. His voice had lost the careful evenness. Just a few degrees, but enough to feel, please. The please surprised me. It was genuine. Not performative, not manipulative. A real please, from someone who did not use that word easily. I studied him for another second. I'm going to the compensation hearing, I said. That part doesn't change. But I'm not going to do anything with what I felt from that envelope tonight. I kept my voice low and direct. Not yet. Not without understanding what I'm actually holding. Nathaniel looked at me for a long moment. You felt it, he said quietly. Not just saw. Felt. That's how it works. He exhaled. One short, controlled breath. Set his untouched glass down on the nearest surface. Then you already know, he said, that my brother has been protecting someone with that secret for a very long time. He straightened his jacket with the movements of a man composing himself. The question you should be asking, he said, is whether that someone deserved to be protected. He walked away before I could respond. I stood there in the middle of the noise and the movement and the lingering scent of cedar and rain that I needed to stop noticing, and felt the ground shift slightly under everything I thought I understood about tonight. Dominic Ashford was not indifferent. He was not proud. He was protecting someone. And his brother, who carried old guilt like load-bearing architecture, did not think that person deserved it. My psychometry hummed quietly in my chest. There is more, it said, in that certain, unhurried way it always delivered information I was not ready for. There is so much more. I had a rule about my psychometry. The rule was this: when the ability tells you something matters, you are allowed to feel that information, file it, and then table it until you are somewhere private and not standing in the middle of a pack, reception with 300 people who just watched you make history. I applied the rule, filed Nathaniel's words, tabled the ground shifting, straightened my jacket one more time, which at this point in the evening had become less a grooming habit and more a full emotional reset mechanism, and walked to the exit with the composed energy of someone who had everything under control. This was not entirely true, but it was true enough to get me through the doors. The Ashford Estate's main entrance opened onto a wide stone portico that faced a curved private driveway lit by overhead lanterns that threw warm amber light across the steps and the rows of parked cars beyond. The air outside was cool and clean. Early October in Connecticut, doing exactly what early October in Connecticut was supposed to do, and I pulled it into my lungs like I had been rationing breath all evening, which honestly I had been. I stood on the top step for a moment, just existing outside the noise, letting my nervous system remember what quiet felt like. Then I heard someone say my name, Caleb, not from behind me. From the right, near the far end of the portico where the lantern light thinned out and the shadow from one of the stone, columns stretched long across the ground. A man was leaning against the column with his arms crossed, and the specific posture of someone who had been waiting for a while and had decided to be comfortable about it. I recognized him in pieces. First, the build, broad-shouldered, solid without being heavy. Then the jacket, deep navy, expensive but worn casually the way people wore expensive things when they had stopped being impressed by them. Then the face, once the light caught it properly. Marcus Webb. I had not seen Marcus Webb in 14 months. My stomach did something complicated that I chose to classify as surprise and absolutely nothing else. Marcus, I said. My voice came out even. I was very pleased with my voice tonight. It was doing excellent work under genuinely difficult conditions. He pushed off the column and walked toward me, with that unhurried ground-covering stride I remembered. The kind of walk that never looked like it was moving fast, but somehow covered distance efficiently. He stopped 2 steps below me on the stone staircase, which put us at approximately the same eye level, and looked at me with an expression that was warm and careful in equal measure. Marcus Webb was an alpha, not Eastridge Pack. He ran with the Harlow territory out of Hartford, which put him in the same regional pack network but a different chain of command entirely. We had met 2 years ago at an interterritory legal summit, which sounded profoundly boring and largely was, except for the part where Marcus had sat across from me during a contract mediation session and spent 4 hours being genuinely, frustratingly competent while also being genuinely frustratingly attractive. We had talked after, then again. Then regularly for about 8 months, in the specific way 2 people talk when they are circling something neither of them names directly. Then I had ended it, quietly, cleanly, citing the bond obligation. He had accepted it with grace that cost him something. I had felt that cost clearly and said nothing about it, which was its own small cruelty. You could have warned me, he said, not accusatory, almost amused but with something underneath the amusement. I walked into that hall 20 minutes ago to pay my respects to the hosting pack and caught the last 30 seconds of whatever that was. Whatever that was, I said, was Article 7, subsection 4. I know what it was. His eyes moved over my face in that careful, reading way he had. I'm asking how you are. The question landed differently than I expected. Not because it was complex, but because it was simple. Genuinely simple. No agenda underneath it, no strategy, no angle. Just a person asking another person how they were doing after watching them do. Something enormous in a room full of strangers. My throat did something I immediately overruled. I'm fine, I said. You're shaking a little. I'm cold. It's 62 degrees and you're wearing a lined jacket. I run cold. He looked at me for one long second and then very quietly smiled. It was the smile I remembered, the one that started at the corner and moved slowly, like it was checking whether the situation had earned it before committing fully. Okay, he said. Not pushing, just acknowledging. I came down 2 steps, so I was standing beside him rather than above him, which felt less like a position and more like a conversation. Why are you here? I said. The ceremony wasn't open to outside territory. Griffin Cole sent a courtesy notification to all regional alphas 3 weeks ago. Standard dissolution protocol for a bonded pair at the Alpha King level. He paused. I came because I wanted to see that you were okay. I looked at him sideways. 14 months, I said. 14 months, he agreed. You ended contact. I respected it. He was quiet for a moment. That doesn't mean I stopped paying attention. The words settled between us with a weight that was not uncomfortable. More like furniture that had always been in the room, that you had simply stopped noticing. My psychometry stayed quiet. It did that sometimes with Marcus, had always done that. Like whatever history existed between us was too ongoing, too unresolved to give me clean readings. Objects needed settled history to speak. Some things were still being written. The compensation hearing, he said. Harlow Territory has standing to file as an interested party under regional pack law. If the Ashford Pack attempts to obstruct or delay the process, an outside territory filing forces independent oversight. I turned to look at him fully. You looked that up, I said. 3 weeks ago, he said. When I got Griffin's notification, something moved through my chest. Not the bond pull, nothing like that. Something quieter and more complicated. Marcus. You don't have to accept anything, he said quickly. I'm not inserting myself. I'm telling you the option exists. You're representing yourself, which is impressive and also slightly terrifying given who you're going up against. And I wanted you to know that you have standing support if the process gets complicated. I studied his face in the amber lantern light. Warm. Careful. Steady in the specific way Marcus Webb had always been steady, like a person who decided a long time ago what he was made of and had not found reason to revise that decision. Why? I said quietly. He looked at me for a moment. Because some things deserved better than what they got, he said, and so did you. The portico was quiet around us. Inside the estate, the reception continued, noise muffled by stone walls and thick doors. Out here, there was just the lantern light and the cool October air. And Marcus looking at me like I was a question he had already answered for himself, but was waiting for me to catch up on. My chest was doing several things at once that I did not have bandwidth to fully process tonight. I'll think about it, I said finally. That's all I'm asking. Behind us, the estate's main doors opened. Voices spilled out, louder, closer. I turned slightly and saw Griffin Cole step onto the portico, already scanning the space with the systematic attention of a man running a search. He found me in about 2 seconds. Our eyes met. His expression did not change, but he reached into his jacket pocket and produced a small cream-colored card, held it up briefly in my direction, and then placed it deliberately on the stone railing beside the door before turning and going back inside. A contact card, left like a stone on a marked trail. Marcus saw it too. He looked at the card, then at me with an expression that was thoughtful and said nothing. I walked over and picked it up. On the back, in precise handwriting below Griffin's printed contact information, were 4 words. I read it twice, not because I misunderstood it the first time. The handwriting was clear, the message was simple, and my reading comprehension was functioning at full capacity, despite the fact that I had just lived through the single most eventful evening of my 22 years on this earth. I read it twice because I needed the second pass to decide how I felt about it. The answer was several things simultaneously, none of them simple. Marcus was quiet beside me. That was one of the things I had always appreciated about him. His ability to occupy space without filling it, to be present without pressing. He stood slightly to my left with his hands in his jacket pockets and let me think without commentary, which was more than most people managed. I turned the card over. Griffin Cole, Chief Legal Advisor, Ashford Pack Territory. Embossed lettering, heavy cardstock, the kind of professional detail that announced itself without trying to. I turned it back. 4 words in careful handwriting. You're going to say yes, Marcus said. Not a judgment, just an observation, delivered with the quiet certainty of someone who had paid attention long enough to know how I operated. I haven't decided yet, I said. You're still holding the card. I looked down at my hand. He had a point. The honest answer was that I had 2 very distinct voices running in my head, and they were not in agreement. Voice 1 was the voice of self-preservation, the one that had been keeping me functional for 3 years of being bond ignored by an alpha king. This voice was practical, experienced, and had an extensive filing system of reasons why engaging further with anything Dominic Ashford adjacent. Tonight was a choice I would regret. Voice 2 was my psychometry. And my psychometry was not a voice so much as a certainty, low and constant, the kind that does not argue because it does not need to. It simply knew. And what it knew, what it had been telling me since my fingers touched that envelope, was that the thing buried inside Dominic Ashford's guarded, grief-worn history was connected to me in a way I had not yet mapped. I slid Griffin's card into my jacket pocket next to Article 7. I'm going to say yes, I confirmed. Marcus exhaled once, slow and controlled. Okay, you think it's a bad idea? I think, he said carefully, that Dominic Ashford does not ask to talk to people without a reason, and that his reasons are not always the same as the ones he presents. He paused. I also think you are one of the most capable people I know, and you have a law degree and the ability to literally read object history. So if anyone can walk into that conversation without getting outmaneuvered, it's probably you. Probably, I repeated. I'm being honest, not pessimistic. I know. I looked at him sideways. That's why I always liked talking to you. Something moved in his expression, warm and careful, like I said, checking whether the situation had earned the full version of whatever he was feeling before letting it show. He kept it contained, just barely. The estate doors opened again before either of us could continue. This time it was not Griffin. The man who stepped out onto the portico was someone I had never seen before. And I noticed him the way you noticed certain people, immediately and without being able to fully explain why. He was roughly my age, maybe a year older, with sandy brown hair pushed back from his forehead in the slightly disheveled way that suggested. It had started the evening neat and lost the fight around hour 2. His build was lean and angular, and he moved with a quick, purposeful energy that contrasted sharply with the formal surroundings. He was also wearing a press badge clipped to his jacket lapel. A journalist. At a private pack ceremony. I had approximately 1 second to process this before his eyes found mine, with the focused accuracy of someone who had been looking for me, specifically. "Caleb Mercer," he said, crossing the portico toward me with his hand already extended. "I'm Jesse Caldwell, Hartford Independent. I was hoping to get a brief comment on what happened tonight inside." I looked at his outstretched hand. I looked at his press badge. I looked at his face, which had the open, slightly urgent expression of someone running on deadline energy and genuine curiosity in equal measure. Then I looked at Marcus, who had taken one small, subtle step to my left in the way people moved when they were positioning without announcing it. "How did you get onto the estate grounds?" I said to Jesse Caldwell. He had the decency to look briefly caught. "Inter-territory press access. The Ashford Pack filed a public notice for the dissolution ceremony 3 weeks ago. That technically opens limited press access under regional transparency law." "Limited," I said, "meaning you were allowed in the outer grounds. And the overflow viewing corridor," he added, with the energy of someone deciding that partial honesty was better than the alternative. I saw the whole thing from there. I studied him for a moment. My psychometry did not engage because I was not touching him or anything he carried, but I did not need it. Jesse Caldwell was readable in the old-fashioned way, through expression and body language and the specific quality of his energy. He was not malicious. He was hungry in the professional sense, chasing something he believed mattered, with the barely contained momentum of someone who had just watched a story walk up and introduce itself. "What kind of comment are you looking for?" I said. Marcus made a small sound beside me that was not quite a word. "Just your perspective," Jesse said. "What you invoked tonight, the reciprocal clause under Article 7, that has not been used in Eastridge territory in recorded history. The last regional instance was 63 years ago in the Harlow Pack." He glanced briefly at Marcus when he said this, a flicker of recognition crossing his face. "What you did tonight is legally unprecedented at the Alpha King level. People are going to want to understand why." "People," I said, "or your readers, both." He smiled, and it was a good smile, quick and self-aware, the kind that knew it was being deployed, but deployed it anyway because it was genuinely what he had. "I'm not trying to make you a headline. I'm trying to make sure the right version of tonight gets told." The right version. I turned that phrase over carefully, because there were already going to be wrong versions. I knew that with the same certainty I knew most things. By morning, there would be pack gossip, social media posts, probably a thread or two on regional Omega Rights forums. The story of what happened tonight was already loose in the world, moving at the speed of 300 people with phones. The question was what shape it took. "I'm not making a statement tonight," I said, "but I'll consider a formal interview after the compensation hearing concludes." Jesse Caldwell pulled out a card so fast it suggested he had been holding it ready. I took it, slid it into my pocket, 3 cards in my jacket now. Article 7, Griffin Cole, Jesse Caldwell. I was becoming a filing cabinet. "One thing off the record," I said. Jesse nodded immediately. "Whatever version of tonight gets written," I said quietly, "make sure it includes the part where the Omega knew the law better than everyone in that room expected him to." Jesse looked at me for a moment. Then he wrote something in the small notebook he had produced from somewhere and clicked his. Pen closed. "Already did," he said. He excused himself with a nod that included Marcus, moved back toward the estate grounds, and disappeared around the far side of the portico with the quick, purposeful energy he had arrived with. Marcus and I stood in the quiet he left behind. "A journalist," Marcus said. "Apparently. You gave him a future interview. I gave him a maybe." I paused, with conditions. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he said, with the careful neutrality of someone choosing words precisely, "Caleb, whatever is in that envelope, whatever Nathaniel said to you inside, whatever Griffin's note means." He turned to look at me directly. "Be careful with how fast this moves. Some secrets are buried because the people holding them are dangerous, not because they are guilty." I looked at him. "And some secrets are buried," I said quietly, "because the people holding them are afraid." Marcus held my gaze for a long moment. Yes, he said finally. Sometimes that too. The lantern light moved slightly in the October wind. Somewhere on the far end of the driveway, a car started, its headlights sweeping briefly across the stone facade of the Ashford estate. My phone buzzed in my pocket, an unknown number, a text, 3 words. Side entrance. Now, I knew without needing to ask whose instruction that was. Dominic Ashford wanted to talk tonight, not at a hearing, not through Griffin. Tonight, in private, before the world outside had fully processed what happened inside. My psychometry settled in my chest like a held breath. I texted back 2 words. On my way. I put my phone back in my pocket and turned to Marcus. He was already looking at me with the expression of a man who had read the situation accurately and was deciding how much of his opinion to volunteer. Don't, I said. I haven't said anything. You have a whole speech happening on your face right now. The corner of his mouth moved. I just want it noted that going to a private meeting with an alpha king at his own estate, alone, at night, immediately after publicly rejecting him in front of his entire pack, is a choice. Noted, I said, logged. Filed under things Caleb did anyway, he exhaled, reached into his jacket and produced a business card which he held out between 2 fingers. Different from the one I already had from Griffin. Personal number handwritten on the back. If you need anything, he said simply. I took it. Our fingers were close for a second, not touching, just close. And I was aware of it in the specific way you were aware of things you had made, decisions about and were not revisiting tonight. Thank you, Marcus, I said, and I meant it in the full way, the way that covered 14 months and an 8-month almost, and a grace that had cost him something. He nodded once, stepped back. I walked toward the side of the estate. The side entrance was a narrow wooden door set into the stone wall at the far end of the east wing, partially hidden behind a row of mature hedges that had been growing there long enough to become architectural. No lanterns on this side, just the ambient glow from the estate windows above and the thin blue light of a clear October night. Dominic was standing at the door. Not Griffin, not an assistant, not a buffer of any kind. Him, alone. Jacket gone, dress shirt sleeves rolled to the forearm in the way people rolled sleeves when they had stopped performing and started existing. He had one hand braced against the doorframe, and he was looking at the ground when I came around, the hedge, and he did not hear me immediately, which gave me approximately 2 seconds of watching him be unobserved. He looked tired, not the tired of a long evening. The tired that lived deeper than that behind the eyes, in the specific gravity of how a person held their shoulders when they thought nobody was watching. The kind of tired that sleep did not fully fix because it was not made of hours. Then he looked up and found me, and the tiredness recalibrated, not disappeared, recalibrated, behind that familiar composure. You came, he said. I texted back, I said. That was the confirmation. Something shifted briefly in his expression. That almost not smile, closer this time than it had been all evening. He pushed the door open and stepped back. I walked inside. The room was a small study off the east corridor, the kind of secondary space that large estates had in abundance, functional rather than formal, with bookshelves that were actually used and a pair of chairs angled toward a window that looked out onto the dark garden. A single lamp was on. The light was warm and low and made the room feel contained, like a parenthesis in the middle of the larger evening. Dominic closed the door behind us. I did not sit. I stood near the center of the room with my hands in my pockets and waited, because this was his meeting, and I was deeply curious what he planned to do with it. He crossed to the small writing desk near the window. The envelope was there, cream-colored, unsealed, sitting in the center of the desk like it had been waiting. He looked at it for a moment. Then he picked it up and held it out toward me. I did not move immediately. You want me to read it, I said. I want you to understand it, he said. There is a difference. I crossed the room, took the envelope from his hand. Our fingers did not touch, and yet I was hyper-aware of the half-inch of air between them in a way that was deeply inconvenient. I opened the envelope. Inside was a single folded document. Legal format, official letterhead from the Eastridge Pack Medical and Biological Registry. I unfolded it carefully. I read the first paragraph. Then I read it again. The room was very quiet. My psychometry activated without my permission, flooding up through my fingertips from the paper itself, and the history of this document hit me in a wave that was not a vision so much as a wall of Pure feeling. Dominic holding this paper in that dim office, the dread, the grief. The specific anguish of a person reading something that changed the architecture of their life and being completely unable to share it with anyone. I breathed through it carefully and kept reading. The document was a biological compatibility assessment. Standard pack registry formatting. Conducted 3 years ago, dated 2 weeks after I had turned 19. 2 weeks after I had stood in a New Haven University library and felt a faded bond lock into place with the force of something inevitable. The assessment had been requested by the Alpha King's office. The findings were clinical and precise, and they stated, in the careful language of medical documentation, that a mating bond between Alpha Dominic Ashford and Omega Caleb Mercer, if completed, carried a 91% biological probability of fatal heat complication for the Omega. Not difficult, not risky, not something to be managed with medication and monitoring. Fatal, 91%. I stood very still for a long time. The lamp made a small sound. The garden outside the window was dark and silent. 3 years ago, I said. My voice came out level. I was distantly amazed by this. You found this out 3 years ago. 2 weeks after the bond registered, Dominic said. He was standing near the door, not close, giving me the room. His voice was even, but it cost him. I could hear the cost clearly. I had the assessment run privately. 3 different specialists, all 3 returned the same finding. I looked at the document in my hands. 91%. You never told me, I said. No. I stopped. Reorganized. You just chose distance for 3 years. You let me think it was indifference. Yes. The word landed between us like something dropped from a height. I looked up at him. Dominic Ashford was watching me with that full, locked attention, and underneath it, completely unguarded for the first time all evening, the old grief I had felt in the vision, load-bearing, structural. The grief of a person who made a choice they believed was the only choice and then lived inside the consequences of it every day. You were protecting me, I said. I was trying to. By making me feel invisible, his jaw tightened. I know. By treating me like furniture for 3 years, I know. His voice dropped slightly. I know exactly what I did and I know what it cost you. I am not asking you to forgive that. Then what are you asking, I said. He crossed the room slowly. Not all the way to me, halfway, stopping at a distance that was close enough to be deliberate and far enough to be respectful. The reciprocal rejection changes things legally, he said. The compensation hearing will give you territory and status and everything. The clause entitles you to. That part moves forward regardless. He paused. But the document in your hands means the biological risk does not disappear because the legal bond does. The registry flagged it. It stays in your medical file. Any future alpha who presents as a fated candidate will trigger a secondary review. I stared at him. You are telling me, I said slowly, that you commissioned a biological assessment on me without my knowledge, found a result that affects my entire future, kept it secret for 3 years, while letting me believe you simply did not want me, and are now telling me this because you deserve to know, he said quietly. You deserved to know 3 years ago. That was wrong. I made a choice I believed was protective, and it was also a choice that took something from you that was not mine to take. He held my gaze. You're right to understand your own situation. I am sorry for that. The apology was not performed. It was not the apology of someone managing a situation. It was the apology of someone who had been sitting with a specific guilt for a very long time and was finally setting it down in the right place. My chest hurt in about 6 different ways. 91%, I said. Yes, that is not a small number. No, he said, it is not. I looked down at the document again, then back up at him. Who else knows? I said. Something crossed his face. Nathaniel, he said. And there it was. The old guilt on Nathaniel's face, the pleas that had been genuine, the question he had left me with, whether the person being protected deserved it. He thinks you made the wrong call, I said. Dominic was quiet for a moment. He thinks you should have been told immediately and allowed to make your own decision. A pause. He is probably right. The lamplight sat warm and still between us. I was holding a document that reframed 3 years of my life in a single reading. I was standing in a quiet room with a man whose grief had been structural for exactly as long as my confusion had been. The irony of that was not lost on me. We had been carrying the same years differently, him under the weight of a secret, me under the weight of not knowing. and both of us shaped by the same piece of paper I was now holding in my hands. I need to think, I said. I know. I am not processing this tonight. I know that too. I folded the document carefully and put it back in the envelope. Then I held it out toward him. He shook his head slightly. Keep it. It belongs to you more than it belongs to me. I looked at the envelope in my hand. Then I put it in my jacket pocket, next to Article 7 and Griffin's card, and Marcus's number and Jesse Caldwell's contact information. My jacket was doing a lot of archival work tonight. I walked toward the door. Caleb. I stopped. Did not turn around immediately. Gave myself one breath. Then I turned. Dominic was standing in the warm lamplight with his sleeves rolled up in his careful composure, and 3 years of load-bearing grief visible in the set of his shoulders, and he looked at me the way he had not looked at me once in 3 years. Directly, fully, like I was not a window but the thing worth looking at. I know it does not fix anything, he said quietly, but you were never invisible to me, not for a single day. The room was very still. My psychometry hummed once, low and certain, and said nothing else. I turned and walked out the door, and I kept walking, past the east corridor, past the reception noise that had thinned to the comfortable hum of an evening winding down, past the portico where Marcus had stood and lantern light had moved in the October wind. I walked to my car, sat in the driver's seat, and held the envelope in my lap in the dark for a long time without opening it. I did not need to open it. I already knew what was inside. What I needed was to decide what I was going to do with it. The compensation hearing was held 4 days later in the Eastridge PAC's Regional Legal Chamber, a formal room in the Territory's Civic Building in downtown Hartford, Connecticut. High ceilings, long oak table. Chairs arranged with the specific deliberateness of a room designed to make everything feel consequential. It was also, notably, open to the public under the regional transparency statutes that Jesse Caldwell had correctly cited on the portico. The room was full. I had expected attendance. I had not expected this specific quality of attention, the kind that pressed against the walls and sat in the silence between formal statements. PAC members, legal observers, 3 journalists including Jesse, who had secured a press seat in the back row and gave me a small professional nod when I walked in. I nodded back. Marcus was seated in the observer section to the left. He was wearing charcoal gray and the careful expression of a man who had said everything he intended to say and was now present simply as witness. Our eyes met briefly when I entered. He dipped his chin once. I understood it completely. I'm here. No agenda. Just here. Nathaniel Ashford was seated behind the Ashford PAC's legal table, slightly apart from Griffin and the other advisors. He looked at me when I entered with an expression that had the weight of 4 days of waiting in it. I held his gaze for a moment, just a moment. Then I took my seat at the opposing table, set my copy of Article 7 on the surface in front of me, and placed the envelope beside it. Dominic sat directly across the table. He looked at me the same way he had in the lamplight of the East Wing study. Directly, fully, not through me. I looked back. The officiating legal officer called the hearing to order. The first 20 minutes were procedural. Compensation framework, territory assessment, status reclassification under the reciprocal dissolution clause. Griffin presented the Ashford PAC's formal position with polished efficiency, responded to each point with the specific calm of someone who had spent 4 days doing nothing but preparing, which was exactly what I had done. I was also, underneath the calm, doing the thing I always did in high-stakes situations, running the internal audit, checking the weight of what I was about to do against the weight of what it would cost. Because I had a choice here. I could take the compensation. Territory rights, status elevation, financial settlement. Everything Article 7 entitled me to. I could walk out of this room more material security than I had entered the bond with 3 years ago, and I could leave the contents of the envelope exactly where Dominic had kept them for 3 years. Private, buried, between the people who already knew. That was one path. The other path was the envelope sitting on the table in front of me. The legal officer asked if I had any additional submissions to enter into the formal record. I put my hand on the envelope. My psychometry activated the moment my fingers touched it, because it always did now with this particular object, but this time I did not pull back. I let it come. The vision was different from the first 2 times. Not the dim office, not the dread. This time I saw the moment before the office. Dominic, younger looking by the specific measure of a person who has not yet received news that ages them, sitting in a waiting room with clean white walls and the particular stillness of someone trying to hold themselves very carefully together. His hands were on his knees, his eyes were on the middle distance. A doctor entered, handed him a folder. I felt what he felt in the moment he read the first line. Not dread, not yet. First there was confusion. The specific disorientation of information that does not fit into any category you have prepared for. Then the confusion resolved into understanding, and the understanding was so much worse than the confusion had been. 91%. I felt his hand stop being steady. Felt the moment he made the decision, not slowly, not after careful deliberation, but immediately, with the panicked instinct of someone who sees a threat and places themselves between it and the person they would not survive losing. The decision came before the grief. The grief came after, settling in behind the decision like water finding level, and it had lived there ever since. He had been 23 years old. He had made the only choice he could see. He had been wrong about what the choice would cost me. Not because he did not care, but because he could not fully calculate a cost. He could not see from inside his own terror. The vision released me. I sat with it for one breath. 2. Then I picked up the envelope and spoke. I'd like to enter a supplemental document into the formal record, I said. My voice was steady in the way it had been all evening at the ceremony 4 days ago. Doing excellent work. A biological compatibility assessment commissioned by the Alpha King's office 3 years ago. Conducted at the time of bond registration. Findings withheld from the Omega Party. The room changed, not loudly. Quietly, the way rooms changed when information arrived that rearranged the furniture of everything people thought they understood. I heard the shift in the quality of the silence, felt the attention sharpen. I did not look at Dominic. I looked at the legal officer and kept my voice level. The assessment indicates a 91% biological probability of fatal heat, complication for the Omega in the event of bond completion. I am entering this document not to litigate the Alpha King's decision to withhold it, but to ensure the public record of this bond's dissolution reflects the complete truth. I paused. The narrative currently understood by this territory is that the Alpha King rejected his Omega. The complete truth is that the Alpha King made a unilateral medical decision that was not his to make, in the belief that it was protective, without the Omega's knowledge or consent. I set the envelope on the table. I want the record to show both things, the harm of the decision and the intention behind it, because both are true. Nathaniel made a sound that was not quite audible. I felt it more than heard it. The legal officer looked at the envelope, at Dominic, at me. Does the Alpha King contest this submission? I looked at Dominic for the first time since I had begun speaking. He was very still. Not the controlled stillness of performance. The stillness of a man who had decided before he walked into this room that whatever Caleb chose to do with the truth, he would not obstruct it. His hands were flat on the table. His face was open in a way that probably cost him more than anything else in this room. No, Dominic said quietly. I do not contest it. The room exhaled. The legal officer entered the document into the record. Griffin did not object. The hearing continued for another 20 minutes, settling the compensation terms with a thoroughness that I participated in with full attention because I had earned that settlement, and I was not leaving it on the table out of sentiment. Territory rights. Status elevation. Financial settlement. Mine. Done. When the formal portion concluded, the legal officer adjourned. The room began to move, voices, chairs, the specific sound of a formal proceeding releasing into ordinary human noise. Marcus stood from the observer section. He crossed toward me at the pace of someone with no urgency, stopped at the edge of the table, and looked at me with that warm, careful expression. Caleb, he said. Marcus, you didn't have to enter it into the record. I know. Why did you? I considered the question. Because he was 23 and terrified, and he made the wrong call for the right reason, and I think the world should know that both of those things can be true at the same time. I held his gaze, and because I'm not interested in a version of this story where he's the villain, that's not what happened. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Okay, he said. I know that's not the answer you were hoping for. No, he said honestly, but it's yours to give. He reached out and briefly, lightly, touched my shoulder. Take care of yourself, Caleb. A pause, warm and without bitterness. You deserve someone who doesn't make choices for you. I know, I said. So do you. He looked at me for one long moment. Then he nodded, picked up his jacket from the chair, and walked out of the room with the quiet dignity of a person who had loved something gracefully and was letting it go the same way. I watched him go. I did not let myself look away until he was through the door, because he deserved that much. The full witness of a goodbye. The room had mostly cleared when I finally turned. Dominic was standing near the far wall alone. Griffin and the legal team had moved into the corridor. Nathaniel had paused near the door, and when he saw me turn, he looked at his brother for one long moment, then at me, and walked out quietly, closing the arc he had been carrying, leaving us the room. I crossed toward Dominic. He did not move toward me. He waited, still giving me the space, still doing the one thing I had not expected from him, letting me lead. I stopped in front of him. 3 years ago, I said, you made the choice for both of us. He held my gaze, did not flinch, did not qualify. Yes, he said, I did. That was wrong. Yes, he said, it was. I reached into my jacket pocket, not for Article 7, not for the envelope. I pulled out the biological assessment document and held it in my hand, and I let my psychometry run one final time, feeling the full history of it, the fear and the grief and the 23-year-old who could not calculate what his protection would cost. Then I folded it carefully and put it back. If there is going to be a future, I said quietly, this time the choice is mine. I looked at him for one more second. Then I reached out and took his hand. His fingers closed around mine. Not tight, just present. The way you held something you understood was not yours to keep, but were grateful to be trusted with. We stood there in the empty hearing room in Hartford, Connecticut, in the quiet after everything, two people choosing something that was not destiny and not biology and not fate, just a decision, just us. There is a coffee place 2 blocks from here, I said finally. They have good peach cobbler. Something moved across his face. The full version of the smile this time, not the almost not. The real one arriving slowly, like it was checking whether the moment had earned it. It had. I would like that, Dominic said. We walked out of the hearing room together. Outside, Hartford was doing what Hartford did in October. Cool air, amber light through the turning trees. The ordinary beautiful business of a city that did not know or care that something significant had just been decided inside one of its civic buildings. It felt exactly right. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as can ever imagine. So do check it out. Hit subscribe. The next story drops soon.